a 90-year-old woman, just gave birth. But what happened 1 year earlier changed everything. For 90 years, Sarah had been barren. The promise? Nothing but painful memories. Until 3 mysterious strangers appeared at her tent, and what they said next would test everything she believed. The visitor looked straight at their tent and said, "In 1 year, Sarah will have a son." Sarah's response? She laughed. But it wasn't a laugh of joy. Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too difficult for Jehovah? Now the countdown began. 1 year, and this time there was no escaping the promise. But here's what makes this even more complicated. Abraham already had a son, and what happens next will tear this family apart. The impossible promise was fulfilled, but the price Abraham would have to pay would test his faith to the breaking point. Watch till the end, because what God asks of Abraham next will leave you speechless.
The silence of the southern land was not merely an absence of sound. It was the echo of an unfulfilled covenant, a great, aching emptiness that dwarfed the vast landscape they inhabited. They had left the comfortable hearths of Ur. They had traveled vast distances across the Fertile Crescent. They had built a life on an oath from the Almighty, yet the promise of a countless seed, an heir, remained a mirage. Abraham, now 99 years old, gazed across the plains, his heart heavy with the weight of that unkept vow. He was the father of many nations only in name, a patriarch without a proper lineage. His thoughts were often interrupted by the sight of Ishmael, the son born 14 years prior. Ishmael was a reminder of their failure to simply wait. According to the sacred count, the boy was 13, a sturdy, dark-haired adolescent, but he was the product of a human solution, not a divine miracle. He was a son, but not the son. And Sarah, at 89, felt the burden far more keenly than any man could know. Years of fruitless waiting had withered the natural hope, leaving behind the bitter residue of desperation. Her faith was not broken, she still trusted Jehovah, but the clock of her body had stopped long ago, and she looked to her own will to make the oath come true. "Jehovah has prevented me from bearing children," she announced to Abraham one evening, her voice tight with suppressed grief and conviction. "Please, have relations with your servant Hagar." It was a desperate, human maneuver, a cultural loophole she hoped would substitute for a celestial decree. The act itself was a violation of their shared hope, yet Abraham listened to his wife's voice. He submitted to the scheme that would forever complicate his destiny. Soon, Hagar conceived, but the simple, transactional act yielded an immediate poison. As the belly of the Egyptian slave grew round with Abraham's offspring, so did the friction in the household. Hagar, now the vessel of Abraham's lineage, began to look at her mistress with palpable contempt, disrupting the established order and dignity of Sarah. The human solution had yielded an heir, but it had irrevocably birthed division and bitterness. The years that followed were marked by this silent hostility, the constant reminder that the covenant was waiting on a miracle, not a compromise. Then, one sweltering day, near the great trees of Mamre, the course of their stagnant world was permanently altered. Abraham, exhausted by the heat, was sitting near the entrance of his tent. When he looked up, 3 men stood nearby. Though he did not know they were angels, messengers of the divine, his immediate response was one of profound reverence and hospitality. Born of the nomadic code of honor, he ran to them, bowing low to the ground and urgently pleading, "Jehovah, if I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass by your servant." His urgency was total. He did not ask them to stay. He demanded it, insisting they cool themselves under the shade of the tree, wash the dust from their feet, and refresh themselves before continuing their journey. He rushed into the tent, his face radiating excitement, and commanded Sarah to quickly take 3 seah measures of fine flour, knead the dough, and make round cakes. He ran himself to the herd, selecting a tender young bull, commanding his servant to prepare it with utmost haste. In a short time, Abraham presented the feast: milk, butter, and the meat, and stood serving his mysterious guests under the tree, a powerful patriarch humbling himself before travelers whose identities he could only begin to suspect. The meal ended, and the conversation turned, the tone shifting from geniality to an unnerving focus. One of the visitors spoke, his voice carrying an authority that cut through the pleasantness. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Abraham answered, his eyes on the ground. "There, in the tent." Then came the sentence that seized the breath and logic from the very air, transforming the casual visit into a celestial decree. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and your wife, Sarah, will have a son." Sarah was listening from inside the tent, the barrier of woven cloth hiding her expression, but unable to mute the words. They struck her with the impossible force of thunder. She was worn out. Her body was dead to childbearing. Her husband was ancient. And yet, this voice, this certainty, a sound escaped her, not joy, but an involuntary, bitter laughter. "After I am worn out, and my Lord is old, will I really have this pleasure?" she thought. The cynical question, a reflection of her lifetime of shattered hopes. She was laughing at the very idea of pleasure, fertility, or motherhood, after 89 years of failure. But the voice from outside the tent had heard the silent mirth. The angel's gaze, though unseen by her, pierced the thick tent fabric and found her doubt. Why did Sarah laugh, saying, "Can I really bear a child when I am so old?" The question was not a query, but a profound, direct challenge, followed by the terrifying, the ultimate question that revealed his true identity. Is anything too difficult for Jehovah? Her laughter died in her throat, replaced by a sudden, consuming terror. Exposed, shamed, and denying the truth that was only moments old, she stammered, "I did not laugh." But the angel's reply was a quiet, unshakable certainty that left her reeling, knowing her secret doubt had been witnessed by a power beyond her understanding. "No, but you did laugh." The three men rose to leave, the pronouncement hanging in the air like a sword. The time had been set. The impossible was now scheduled. Sarah knew, with a sudden, devastating clarity, that her long journey of faith was about to culminate, not in her own flawed solutions, but in a divine appointment that left no room for doubt or escape. Her cynicism had been met with a command, her doubt with a promise, and now she was bound to the relentless fulfillment of Jehovah's word. The seed of laughter had been planted. Would it be a laughter of scorn, or a laughter of ultimate triumph? The next year would tell. The laughter fulfilled, the caravan of the three mysterious figures moved on, receding into the dusty horizon. But the promise they left behind was not an echo. It was a seed of fire planted in the dry earth of Sarah's life. She stood paralyzed at the tent entrance, the raw exposure of her doubt still stinging. She had denied her laughter, yet the angel of Jehovah had affirmed it, transforming her private skepticism into a public, terrifying certainty. The miracle was coming. There was no more space for doubt, only for the relentless, measured passage of time toward the impossible due date. For Sarah, the ensuing months were not merely a time of waiting, but an agonizing spiritual test. Her mind warred constantly with her memory. Her body had been as good as dead regarding childbearing, the natural channels of life closed decades ago. Every ache, every morning, was a quiet taunt in the desert heat. Yet she found herself clinging to one thing alone, the character of the divine speaker. She focused not on her withered womb, but on the limitless capability of the one who asked the shattering question, "Is anything too difficult for Jehovah?" It was in this crucible of waiting that her faith was forged into its final, powerful form. She considered him faithful, who made the promise. Hebrews 11:11. The seasons turned precisely as foretold. The world moved on its axis, and the time Jehovah had set arrived. Exactly 1 year after the promise was decreed under the trees of Mamre, the divine word was made manifest. Against all the known laws of nature, against the testimony of 90 years of life, Jehovah kept his word to Sarah. He intervened in the relentless progression of time and decay, doing for her precisely what he had spoken. After decades of barrenness, after the failure of her own compromising schemes, Sarah gave birth to a son. Abraham, exactly 100 years old, immediately named the child Isaac, a permanent memorial that encapsulated the entire agonizing drama. The name meant laughter. It held the tension of her cynical amusement and the eventual, magnificent explosion of her sacred, triumphant joy. When the great, life-changing moment arrived, Sarah's laughter was no longer a cynical sound of doubt, but one of pure, unrestrained fulfillment. Her heart, so long a desolate place, overflowed. "God has brought me laughter," she declared, the words ringing with finality. "Everybody hearing of it will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham, 'Sarah will nurse sons, yet I have given birth to a son in his old age'?" She knew this was not merely a private birth, but a testimony to all who would hear the story, that the miraculous was possible, that the Almighty was faithful, and that Jehovah's timeline, however long, was always perfect. The family settled into an uneasy, fractured peace. The miracle baby grew quickly into a vibrant toddler, a visible, daily representation of the covenant. But the division that Hagar had brought years earlier, though contained, had never truly vanished. The two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, were separated by 13 years and an unbridgeable gulf of destiny. The tension peaked when Isaac was around 5 years old, possibly on the day of his weaning feast. Sarah witnessed a scene that pierced her mother's heart like a sword. Ishmael, now a sturdy 18-year-old, was seen poking fun at the child of the promise. It was not innocent sibling rivalry. It was a cruel mockery, directed at the true heir, a dark seed of jealousy planted by Ishmael's mother, now coming to fruition in the young man. This act was a direct, dangerous threat to the future lineage. Sarah, driven by a fierce, righteous need to protect the covenant that flowed exclusively through Isaac, immediately confronted Abraham. Her demand was swift, sharp, and harsh, yet born of spiritual necessity. "Drive out this slave girl and her son, for the son of this slave girl will not be an heir with my son, with Isaac." Abraham was deeply distressed. Ishmael was his firstborn son. He had been a part of his life for nearly 2 decades. The thought of summarily casting him and Hagar out was a profound agony, shaking the foundations of his patriarchate. But Jehovah intervened, silencing Abraham's paternal distress with a clear, uncompromising command. "Do not feel distressed over the boy and your slave girl. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, for what will be called your offspring will be through Isaac." The divine decree confirmed Sarah's severe judgment. Ishmael was a son, but Isaac was the vessel of the promise. The covenant, the entire future of God's oath, was solely dependent on the miraculous child. Jehovah assured Abraham that Ishmael would not be abandoned. "I will make a nation of the son of the slave girl, because he is your offspring." But the path forward was now clear, purged of compromise. Thus, at the explicit command of Jehovah, Abraham complied. He rose early the next morning, giving Hagar bread and water, and sent her and Ishmael away into the wilderness. It was a mournful but necessary final act that secured the future of the miraculous son. Isaac, the child of laughter and the vessel of the eternal covenant, was protected. The impossible promise had not only been kept, but had been secured against human error and hostility, marking the end of Abraham's life of compromise and the irreversible beginning of his lineage of faith. The foundation was laid, the heir was secured, but the promise that secured Isaac's life now demanded something else from Abraham, an oath that would test the patriarch's faith not merely to its breaking point, but to the very edge of sacrifice. Was Abraham's obedience truly absolute, even when faced with the blood of his beloved, miraculous son?